Hello, welcome to my kitchen here at Trails N62. Going to be doing a little bit something different today. I'm going to be canning some stuffed pepper soup. Now I prepare this a little bit different than you would normally do a stuffed pepper soup that you're going to eat because I'm going to can it. So I'm going to try my new Nesco electric canner. So I'm only going to make about 5 pints, if it makes that much in my recipe, 4 pints, whatever it makes. And this Nesco electric canner appears to be nice. I haven't used it yet, so we're going to try it out and see how it works. But it's good for small batches. I hate to take a big old canner, and just can 3 or 4 or 5 jars of something. When I do my big canner, I like to have it full. If I do my double canner, I like to have it double full. So it's just a quirk of mine. If I'm going to be using the gas, the time, the energy to do a big canner, I want a full canner. So it's just me now. So I don't need that a lot. I don't need a lot amount. I don't need a lot of it. But I do want to try this and see. It's going to do hopefully 5 pints at least. This stuffed pepper soup, and I'll go through the recipe and how I'm doing this with you right now. Okay, first up, the recipe for the stuffed pepper soup actually calls for 1 cup of finely diced onion, which is about a medium onion or so, and 1 large green bell pepper, or about a cup of chopped peppers. Now, the thing about canning peppers and canning onions is that when you can them, they have to be blanched first. So instead of blanching these first, I'm just chopped them up and I'm putting them here in my skillet. I'm going to heat them up and kind of saute them here before I put my hamburger in. Now, I happen to use, because I don't have a garden this year, and I dry my onions, dehydrate my peppers. These happen to be dried peppers and onions that I reconstituted yesterday and measured them out after they were reconstituted into what I needed to make this particular recipe. So now I'm just gonna saute them up a little bit and get them nice and almost done, kind of blanched with a saute, so to speak. And then I'm going to add my hamburger. Now I put my hamburger in, and I'm going to cook it, but I'm not going to cook it all the way. See, when I can hamburger, I cook it to like it's almost like, I don't know, about 3/4 of the way cooked, or a little over half cooked. That's why I started my peppers and onions first. I want to make sure they get good and blanched. So I'm going to do my hamburger, and I'm going to cook it up to where it's not quite all the way done, because the cooking process will continue in the pressure canner. And that's when I can hamburger. I don't cook it up all the way. I cook it a little over half done, 3/4 done. And that kind of gives it that fried texture even after you can it up, because I can my hamburger dry. I don't mix it with a broth or water or anything when I can it. So there's a little moisture still comes out of it, and but it maintains that good crispy type. Well, not really crispy, but not like fresh fried hamburger, but it maintains that texture much more. So I'm going to fry this up, and I started the peppers and the onions first because they take a little bit longer, but they'll cook more with the hamburger here, and I'll get it all good and mixed together. So that's 1 pound of hamburger that I put in here, and I'm going to fry that up about, like I said, about half, 3/4 way, and then we'll go with the rest of the ingredients. Now, the recipe basically says to brown your meat first. If you're making the soup, brown it first, then drain off the grease, and then add the peppers and onions. But this is pretty good quality hamburger here. and you'll notice there's just not much, if any, grease in there. And what there is, the onions and peppers absorb. So I've got it about a little over halfway cooked. It'll finish cooking in the pressure cooker. You could brown it a little more if you wanted to. Of course, if you're just making the soup and not canning, then you'd want to. But you can brown it a little more if you want to. But this works for me because I'm all about as quick, easy, and simple as possible. All right, let's get the rest of the ingredients in. Once my hamburger and peppers and onions are done, I'm next going to add, according to the recipe, a 29 ounce can of diced tomatoes. Now normally I would use my own tomatoes, but I don't have any diced tomatoes canned. All I have is crushed tomatoes and tomato sauce. So I'm going to add the diced tomatoes, sauce and all, because it's a nice, good, thick sauce. It'll be good in the canning process. Now if you have fresh tomatoes, those of course will work better, especially since I'm pressure canning it. It would be a lot better if they were fresh tomatoes. I debated going to the store and getting some fresh tomatoes to do this, but this was so much easier, so this time I decided to go this route. But if you're going to do fresh tomatoes, you can do fresh tomatoes in a 29 ounce can. Now most cans are by weight rather than volume, so don't try to convert that to volume. I'm pretty sure it's weight. That's between 3 and 3/4 cups, I believe, of tomatoes. And then I'm going to add a tomato sauce. The recipe calls for a 15 ounce can. And I've got my own canned tomato sauce that I'm using, so that's roughly 1.5 to 1 3/4 cups of tomato sauce. And that's my home canned tomato sauce there. If you're going to use store-bought, it'd be about a 14 ounce can of tomato sauce. Right, I'm getting a little shadow in there. It's my new lights in the kitchen. Let me try it from over here. Still getting a shadow. That's better. So, next then will be, calls for a 14 ounce can of chicken broth, which again is about 1.5 cups of chicken broth, or a little more. So I've got my chicken broth going in right here. That's made from a chicken base. And then we add some spices. Going to put in 1/4 teaspoon of dried thyme, 1/4 teaspoon of sage, and the recipe doesn't call for it, but I like a little garlic in mine. So I'm going to put 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder. Give all this a good stir. Turn my heat on. Now I am going to can this. So normally the recipe you would cook this for about 30-45 minutes until everything is good and tender. But since I'm going to can it, I don't need to cook it, because the canning process will cook it plenty. But I do want to put it in hot, so it's going to go in the canner hot. If I'm lucky, this will make a little bit more than 5 pints, and then I'll just cook the rest of it up and have it for lunch. Okay, now I'm going to let that heat up, let the spices get mixed in there. Then I'm going to taste it before I add salt and pepper. So I'll salt and pepper it to taste once I get it started blending in all the flavors there together. Once my soup is heated up, just before boiling, I want it nice and hot, but I don't want it boiling. I've got it in here. I have my jar lids soaking in hot water. Some people say you don't have to. I think they say in the books you don't have to do this anymore, but the basic principle of science does work here. When you soften rubber, it seals better. So I soften them up. I like to do that. They say you don't have to, but you follow your own conscience. I soften mine up. You don't boil them. You just bring the water to a boil or near boil and then shut it off, and then you put the lids in. My jars are soaking in the sink. You have to have hot jars. You're putting in hot liquid. And then I'm going to be putting hot water in the canner. So I want my jars hot. Some people heat them up in the dishwasher, and some people heat them up in the oven, and different things like that. I soak mine in hot water in the sink. So one at a time, I'll bring them out. Make sure you stir your soup because you want to get all the ingredients. Now when you're making this recipe to eat, it calls for rice. So while it's actually cooking on the stove, then you cook you up 2 cups of cooked rice. But since rice doesn't can, or at least not for me, then what I will do is I will make the soup and I dehydrate my rice. So I will I have dehydrated rice. So what I will do when I cook this soup, I will make a half of cup of cooked rice out of my dehydrated rice, which just takes, it's like a 5-minute minute rice. And I'll just make that up and add it to the soup, heat it up, and it'll be good to go. Now you want to fill your jars to 1 inch below the top. I may have that one just a little bit full. 1 inch below the top. And you do that, allow for the air space to get out. For the air to get out, you want to make sure you have your head space correct. Okay? Now 1 inch from the top, you can measure it. It's going to be to this bottom here. Wait, this bottom rim right here. That's 1 inch from the top right there. Okay? You can measure it and see. Alright. Now we're going to do the rest of these. Now when you do these, again, make sure you stir your soup because you want to get all your ingredients mixed up in there as you put it in, or you want to get some juice in there too. Otherwise you get too much of one thing and not enough of another. So it looks like it made 5 pints. Now it actually made just a little less than 5 pints. So with 1 inch head space, so I just took a little bit out of each one of them to make them all even, and a 1/4 so inch more head space is not going to hurt it. Since these have meat in them, I'm going to wipe my rims with vinegar. I always use vinegar for meat, or if I'm dry canning beans, because the oils, grease, fat, when you're doing meats and stuff, and a lot of your dried beans have a oil in them. The vinegar will cut through the oil better and make sure that the tops are clean. Otherwise, I just use a damp paper towel and I'll wipe the rims off. I also like to make sure that I clean up the sides a little bit where I've slopped it on there around the rims. I don't want it getting that under the bands because, well, that makes them harder to get off. They stick and that sort of thing. Again, I use vinegar. Then I'm going to take my vinegar and I'll put my vinegar in my canner because I have very hard water. And you don't have to, but it helps. The outside of the jars don't get cloudy. Your canner doesn't get all deposits in there. Next, we've got those wiped. We're going to put on our lids. Got our little lid getter here. We'll set our lids on there. Put our rings on. This may be hot. If it's too hot for you, get a towel and wrap around it. And just going to do them finger tight. Understand some people's finger tight's stronger than other people's finger tights. You don't want it too tight, because if it's too tight, it'll cause the lids to buckle real bad. And it won't get the air exhausted out like it should. But finger tight. Now my canner says to add hot water after you get the jars in. This is the first time I've used it. We'll see how that works. Normally in a canner I put the hot water in first. But in this case it says to add it afterwards. So since it says to add it afterwards, for a change, just because, you know, a person likes a change every once in a while, I'm going to follow directions. Now there's my Nesco canner. It's an electric canner. This should prove interesting. Hopefully good. Now first I'm going to dump my vinegar. Just a little dab in there that I use to wash the jars. It says to add 8 cups of hot water. I try to add water to my canners so that I have plenty of water for things such as meat, which has to can longer than other things. I add the basic amount it says in the instructions for basic things. I put a little bit more in for things that's going to have to go like 90 minutes. Because that's a long time. Plus I don't always get my timing down right. It may vent a little longer than the 10 minutes, or it may get a little while before I start timing the 10 minutes. So it may use a little bit more water. But you always want to make sure that the water in your canner, regardless of what kind you use, is not up to the tops of the jars. You need it below the rim of the jar. So about the shoulder on these jars here, these are regular mouth jars, is the highest you want it, and you really don't want it that high unless you have to. Now if you're canning smaller jars, like in my double canner when I do half pints or something, I may put a double rack or something in there to lift it up a little higher. The water does not cook in a pressure canner. The pressure cooks. So the water is just to generate steam in order to build up the pressure. Now, we're ready to go. Let me check my instructions here to make sure. Close and lock the lid. Attach the proper pressure limiting valve to the lid. I've already done that. So I'm going to close my lid. It's got a lock deal on it right here. Locked. Okay. Now on my pressure regulating lid, this is the pressure regulating valve here. It's 15 pounds at my altitude, elevation above sea level. It's over 1,000 feet, so I use 15 pounds. It comes with another one, which is a 10-pound weight. If you're below 1,000 feet, you would use that. So I've got that on there. I've got my lid locked down. Plugging it in. Plugged in. Set on high. Set on high. Press the thyme to the amount. These are pints. They have meat. So we're going to take it up to 75 minutes for pints. Oops. 75 minutes for pints. set your pressure limiting valve on exhaust. It's on exhaust. All right. Press start. Start. There we go. So it's starting, and it says the digital dial chase will begin to rotate, and this will continue until the correct internal temperature is reached, which will take up to 30 minutes. So that'll take 30 minutes to reach the temperature. Then it will beep once, and the control will show E10. The preset E10 code is for the 10 minutes of exhaust that it has to do. And then after that, it will show a blinking E0, and it will beep. At this time, you set the pressure limiting valve to airtight, and once the canner resumes, the control panel will beep again. And then the required processing time will then start. So, it's that easy. We'll see if it works. I'm sure it will. Now that is going, I can let it go. It'll beep. My only thing that I have to worry about is at the end of the 10 minutes is locking down the pressure release valve. I don't want to forget to do that. Other than that, we have a bit of a mess that we need to get cleaned up here. So I'll clean that up while that's cooking. And I'll check back with you later when it goes through the different stages. The canner just beeped and started the 10-minute countdown. As you can see, I turned it sideways so it wouldn't vent underneath the cabinet. There's a reason it's a different angle. There you can see the E10. So it started the 10-minute venting countdown. Now it's at E9. It actually took less than 30 minutes. It only took about 15 minutes, which was good. So it's venting. You can hear it venting pretty good. And then after the 9 minutes or 10 minutes have gone, it'll beep again, and I'll set it to airtight. Then once it reaches the pressure, then it will start timing down for the 75 minutes. The 10 minutes are up. It went to E flashing 0. That's E for exhaust. So I turn the weight down to airtight, and it will still steam a little bit. They said that's normal, but it'll build up the pressure just like on a regular pressure cooker with a weight on it to 15 pounds, and it may let off a little steam every once in a while because of that. But once it gets up to 15 pounds, then the timer will start over here, 75 minutes for these pints, and then we'll get her done. Here we go. Timer says it's all done. Now you want to be sure and check it. I let it go down naturally. That's one thing you need to do on canning. Always remember to let it cool naturally. Don't take the weight off. Don't open it up. Don't do anything. Let it do it naturally and at its own time. Then you won't get any siphoning or broken jars or things like that. So I'm going to open this up and stand away from the front because there will be some steam come out even though the pressure's all released. There it is. Now we'll take them out, set them on the counter here. Another thing you need to remember when you're taking your jars out, don't set them on a cold counter. I have a tile counter. It's going to be cold even though it doesn't feel cold. Granite counters, that sort of thing, even a regular counter. Always put them on a towel or a rack, but don't set them on a cold countertop. Ooh, now that looks good. Another thing I want to mention, that when you use your canner, whether it's electric canner or regular canner, always make sure you have a rack in the bottom. Don't let these cans set right on the bottom of the canner directly, because you'll get cracked jars and that sort of thing. So always make sure you have a rack in there to set them on. Don't let them set straight on the bottom of the canner. Another thing I might mention that I didn't mention at first, always check your air vent, your pressure release vent, and make sure that it's unobstructed. Always check those, make sure they're unobstructed before you get started, because if the pressure builds up in there and is not releasing the steam, it may be a little late to check it. So always check it beforehand. Okay, another thing I might want to mention is be careful about seasoning things, especially like soups and things like that. Don't over season it. Better to season it when you cook it than over season it before you can it, because the seasoning will intensify in the canning. So I never season it too much when I'm canning it, because I don't want it to over season. It's better to season it, like I said, better to season it when you cook it. Now the other thing is, this is a soup, so when you get it out, it does call for adding rice. So you add your rice afterwards. For the whole thing, it says like 2 cups of rice, somewhere around there. So we're looking at maybe a half a cup of cooked rice per jar. Maybe a little less, 1/3 cup of cooked rice per jar would work fine, something like that, depending on how much rice you want. Alright, so there we have it. I've got 5 jars of stuffed pepper soup. We'll try those out with some rice. We're going to let those cool, let them seal. My electric canner seems to have worked great. Very easy to use. And of course, like every canner, you have to keep an eye on it. You don't want to put it in even these things here and go outside and mow your lawn or something like that, go in the swimming pool. You need to keep an eye on them. You need to keep track on them. You need to be aware of them at all times. So it worked good. I am very happy with it. As a matter of fact, I'll probably try something else in it pretty quick. Maybe something like, I got this recipe for burritos in a jar. I might try that in it next time. Well, there you have it. Stuffed pepper soup. I'll add rice to it later. Looking like it's pretty good. So you need to leave these set, like with all your canning deals. These will set here. I'll listen for them to ping, which means that they're sealing. And then I'll let them set for 24 hours before I do anything with them, because they're just going to sit there for 24 hours. I'm not going to bother them. They need to cool off naturally. They need to seal. And then I will worry about rings and washing them off and labeling them, whatever I need to do. So they look good. Till next time, my kitchen to yours. God bless.